The Glenfarclas Distillery is one of the most popular in all of Scotch whiskey, with their classic sherried single malt profile. And when I think of Glenfarclas, I think of their exceptional family cask single cask series, or the Glenfarclas 105, which was the first modern cask strength single malt to be released all the way back in 1968. But the first Glenfarclas that really grabbed my attention at a whiskey festival many years ago was the Glenfarclas 15-year-old. Today, I'm going to revisit that single malt, and I'm going to see how it stands up and compares side by side with a really fun, high strength, store exclusive Glenfarclas 15-year-old called the Doorcrasher edition, bottled for Kensington Wine Market in Calgary. My name is Matt, this is Whiskey on the West Coast. The Glenfarclas Distillery was founded in 1836 and at this point has been owned by the Grant family for 159 years. They're a family-owned distillery that is committed to making whiskey the way they like it and are very protective of their brand, rarely permitting independent bottlers to use their distillery's name. In 1981, they switched from steam-heated stills, and when they did that, it changed the character of the spirit. Because of this, they quickly changed back to direct fired stills because they lost some of that robust nature of their spirit that interacts and ages so well with sherry casks. As it stands now, Glenfarclas is one of only a handful of distilleries that still use direct fired stills to make their whiskey. Another interesting quirk of the Glenfarclas distillery is their incredibly small angel share. Due to a cooler microclimate, their traditional dunnage warehouses and the use of larger sherry butts, the angel share for Glenfarclas's whiskies is only around a 0.5%, as opposed to the Scottish industry standard of somewhere between 1 to 2.5%. Really quite a stark difference. Many people do seem to consider the Glenfarclas 15-year-old the sweet spot in their range of whiskies, especially since it's the only whiskey in their core range of age-stated whiskies that is bottled at 46% ABV. And as I earlier mentioned, this is the first Glenfarclas whiskey that I took note of early in my whiskey journey. That said, recent price increases here in Canada and talk of batch variation make me very wary of relying too heavily on my past experiences with it. So let's dive into this Glenfarclas 15-year-old core range bottling. And then after that, let's consider the Kensington Wine Market Doorcrasher high percentage ABV Glenfarclas 15. The vital stats on the Glenfarclas 15-year-old is that it is 15 years old, 46% ABV. It's non-chill filtered and natural color according to Whiskey Base. Price here runs about $120 Canadian in Alberta these days and $180 Canadian in British Columbia. I do recall only a couple years ago where this whiskey would go on sale in Alberta for about $65 to $70 Canadian. So quite a big price difference in just a few short years. The cask maturation for this whiskey is sherry cask matured. All right, let's check out the nose here on the Glenfarclas 15. Okay, so it starts off kind of a touch sour, maybe a bit tart, and the tartness is on like a blueberry. Yeah, that's something I oftentimes find in Glenfarclas is like a blueberry note. So there's like blueberry muffins. Bit of coffee, like cold coffee dregs, but it's a really sweet nose. It started off just a touch sour and tart, and now it's all sweetness here. Now that it's breathing a bit more with the whiskey glass cover off. Plums, figs, raisins, butterscotch, and honestly, something a little bit different than just the typical sort of cherry profile here is actually a little bit like lemon curd and vanilla cream. Brown sugar, and one of the things I'm really enjoying about this is actually just like the slightest hint of earthiness, almost like a dunnage note. Yeah, maybe a touch of leather too. Very approachable, very inviting nose. I would not say it's bold. It's definitely more on the subtle side, on the softer side. Really pretty nose. Just a classic sort of approachable nose. All right, on the palate. Sweet brown sugar, Blueberries, again, constant, that comes through from the nose. Like, it's blueberry maple syrup for me, but like, again, sweet, syrupy. Dark fruits, raisins, figs. There's a spice on it. It's like the lightest hint of cinnamon. It's not actually too spicy for me, for my palate. Yeah, that slightest bit of dunnage coming through. It's on the young side for that, in my opinion, but surprised, it's definitely there. I can't ignore it. Toffee and butterscotch on the palate as well. Kind of an interesting note here. If it was more along the line of orchard fruits, I'd say like almost like a caramel apple. But in this case, I'd say like a caramel covered plum. If you kind of applied the same sort of technique to a plum, just covered it in caramel, bite into that. That's kind of what I'm getting there. Really interesting note there. One more sip. Yeah, thinking now, like, it's not very viscous. I remember this whiskey being really oily, really viscous back in the day when I first experienced it. I'm not going to say it's viscous. I'm not going to say it's thin either. It's, I guess, to be expected for a 46% ABV. I guess, yeah, I don't have much more to say on that part there. Finish, it's delicate. It's certainly not a sherry bomb. And if I had to describe the length, it would be mid to short. It's not a particularly long finish on this whiskey. Yeah, that's a decent start. If I had to give that a rating right now, I would put it squarely in like the 85 out of 100. 84, 85. Very respectable whiskey. A great place to get to know the Glenfarclas spirit, if you aren't already familiar with Glenfarclas. Let's move on to the Kensington Wine Market Doorcrasher edition of the 15-year-old. Let's now consider this Glenfarclas 15-year-old Doorcrasher edition that was bottled for Kensington Wine Market. And it was bottled to mark a rather infamous Dodge Ram incident where a Dodge Ram pickup truck was driven through the front doors of the store, causing a lot of damage and resulting in stolen property. Now, my first thought when I heard this news was, stop, don't you know that Springbank lives there? I don't know if any Springbank was harmed during this incident, but what I do know is that the label on this whiskey is pretty cheeky. It features a cheeky, I guess, Trojan horse battering ram, because they can't use a Dodge Ram pickup truck on the front of the label because that would be a copyright issue. And that battering ram is taking aim at the storefront. What's more, since the truck crashed through the doors of the store at 4:56 a.m. in the morning, this Glenfarclas is bottled at 56% ABV, and I believe there were 456 bottles produced. The vital stats on this Doorcrasher are, once again, it's 15 years old, 56% ABV, which is not cask strength, I do have to mention. Non-chill filtered, natural color, about $150 Canadian out of Alberta at Kensington Wine Market. And once again, it's sherry cask matured. All right, turning to the nose. Certainly a similar DNA here. Definitely a common theme. However, this is just much more bold. You might remember me talking about how soft and subtle the Glenfarclas 15 was on the nose. It was a pretty nose, but a delicate nose. This is, again, a lot bolder. Spice is a lot more present. I'd say like freshly shelled walnuts too. There's a nuttiness to this one. But the dessert spices are there. I don't know. I might have mentioned a light cinnamon on the original 15, but yeah, a lot more dessert spice on this. I say chocolate too, like a chalky, like baker's chocolate off the nose. Butterscotch, toffee. Steers more sweet and almost savory. Not so much of that like first tart top note I got when I first nosed the regular 15. Yeah, less of that sour than the standard 15. But still a lot of dried fruits, dark fruits. Yeah. No, it's nice. All right, let's take a sip. Spice, nutmeg. Ooh, nutty, almost like Brazil nuts, I'd say. From that like really nice fancy trail mix you get from Costco. Leather, a bit savory too. Almost like a touch like of teriyaki in there. Caramelized sugar, almost verging on like a little bit burnt. Maybe that's a little bit of like a Maillard effect from those stills, from the direct fired stills. But raisin, the blueberry is definitely, it's back again. So that's another common theme. I do pick up on the age. Like, you can tell it's not a young whiskey. Sometimes I do find some of the other sherry cask younger whiskeys, they do show their youth on occasion. This is not coming across young at all. I'd say it kind of hits right around that 15-year age mark on the palate. Yeah, well, another sip here. It's viscous, it's chewy, way more sherry apparent on this palate than on the standard core range 15. Honestly, there's actually a bit of like sherry funk to this. And once again, that dunnage note that I spoke of with the original 15, it's coming through on here too. Again, like an earthiness as well. Bit of leather on the finish. It's like blueberry, nuts, and raisins, and it's far longer. It's far more sustained than the core range 15. If I let that finish settle, and I did this earlier, if I let that finish just settle and resolve a bit longer, it turns into more of like a menthol and eucalyptus note too. Really interesting whiskey, and definitely much like an amped up, nuttier and more sherried version of the standard core range 15-year-old. Before we get to the conclusions on these whiskeys and a final score for that KWM 15-year-old, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching this far. Thank you for all the support. Those who have been with me right from the start, to those who've just only now subscribed or maybe are about to subscribe. If you haven't already, go ahead, subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know what you think of the video. Thank you so much to my Patreon subscribers. It means a lot that you choose to support me in that way. And let me know, what are your thoughts on Glenfarclas? Do you think there's something special about this whiskey? Have you had Glenfarclas that really stood out to you? And if so, what's your favorite Glenfarclas in the core range? Now, does this Glenfarclas 15-year-old stand up to my recollection of that core range 15? I'd say the nose, yes, it's a classy nose. I really appreciate the nose on this whiskey. However, the palate does not stand up to my memory from all those years ago of just how like oily and viscous it was, just how flavorful and flavor packed it was. Did I change, or did the whiskey? Perhaps it's both, but those who've been drinking whiskey for a lot longer than me will tell you that your palate, your tastes change, and after a while, things that you remember being amazing might just come off a little more plain or regular. It doesn't mean they're any lesser whiskey and they won't impress people in the same way they once impressed you, but it might be as much that I've changed as this whiskey has changed with batch variation. How does the Kensington Wine Market Doorcrasher compare to the standard core range 15-year-old? Favorably. It's packed with big sherry flavor. It's at a price point that's excellent when compared and held up to the core range whiskey. Only a small amount more in cost. And actually, the 15-year-old from Kensington Wine Market is actually cheaper for me to purchase than if I was to purchase the Glenfarclas 15 core range in my home province. That's a big factor for me. I would be looking at the Kensington Wine Market. So would I suggest the standard 15-year-old to someone? I'd suggest that whiskey to someone who's looking to become familiar with the Glenfarclas Distillery for the first time and who has access to the 15-year-old at a fair price. Again, I'll mention it used to be on sale for $66 in Alberta. That's the price I was able to find historically that I had purchased it for. It is double that now. So if you can find it at a fair price and you aren't already familiar with Glenfarclas, absolutely pick the 15-year-old up. But who would I suggest the Doorcrasher 15-year-old to? Anyone who loves Glenfarclas already and loves that Glenfarclas when it's on the heavier sherried side. Anyone who enjoys a dense, flavorful sherry dram, the Kensington Wine Market Doorcrasher 15-year-old is top notch. Which one would I purchase? Uncategorically, I'm going to tell you I would purchase the Kensington Wine Market 15-year-old over the core range. Now that only leaves the score left, and really the score for the Kensington Wine Market Doorcrasher, I'm oscillating here between an 88 and an 89. I think I'm gonna err on the side of caution and give it an 88 out of 100, which really is a fantastic score. If someone hears 88 and thinks that's low, that is not low. That is actually quite high, at least in my opinion. I really love this whiskey. I'm gonna heavily consider picking up a bottle. I'm really enjoying it, and I'd love to be able to see how it develops over time with a full bottle as you drink down the level and let it oxidize a bit. I think it could really change into something really special. So that's my thoughts on these Glenfarclas bottles. Once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. Leave some comments down below, your thoughts on the Glenfarclas whiskeys. And until next time, from the West Coast, Slange.